Hi everyone. For my research project, I decided to focus on the myth of Perseus and Medusa. That name might sound a little familiar to you, but specifically on why Perseus had ended up killing Medusa at the end, and how he did it. So let's start at the very beginning. The story starts way before Medusa's actually killed. It starts when Perseus is born to his parents by the names of Zeus and Danae. Zeus is probably sounding familiar as well. Um, with that being said, he's born. He ends up being cast away into the sea in a chest. His mother's in the chest as well by someone by the name of Acreus. And Acreus actually is Danae's father, which makes that Perseus' grandfather. And the whole reason that he cast them into the ocean was because it had been prophesied and seen into the future that Acreus' grandson, aka Perseus, would actually end up killing him at some point in his life. He did not want that. He did not even want to deal with that. Sends him off into the ocean, okay? And so he does this. The chest ends up grounding actually at the island of Seriphus. The island of Seriphus is ruled by someone named King Polydectes, which he will be important a little bit later on. Perseus grows there. He grows up. He knows everyone. It's just him and his mother. Zeus is not on the island with them. And it's not till he's older that King Polydectes really becomes an issue in any sort of way. But when he is older, King Polydectes ends up tricking him into promising to obtain the head of Medusa and bringing it back to the island of Seriphus. Now, the only reason he chose Perseus to do with into doing this is because he desired his mother Danae. So he wanted Perseus gone so that way he could be with his mother. So Perseus did not know this at the time, so he starts on the journey. He's ready to go do what he asked of him, get Medusa's head, bring it back. He has the help of Athena and Hermes, and with all three of them together, they're able to pressure the Graiae, which are the sisters of Medusa and her sisters, in into giving them supplies they need. And they do this. They seize the Graiae's one shared eye and one shared tooth, and eventually they do give them the supplies they need, which are a pair of winged sandals, so that way he can fly, the cap of Hades, that way he could be invisible. He also gets a sickle, which is a curved sword, to help him decapitate Medusa. And then he also gets a bag, so that way he can conceal Medusa's head on his journey back, and hopefully no one gets turned to stone. So he gets everything he needs, and he's ready to go. He's on his way to Medusa. You're probably thinking, Medusa, I've heard that before. So if you have heard that before, yes, it's Medusa, the one who you stare at and you turn to stone. Her beauty just draws in that attention that is needed, that I guess ends up claiming all of the victims. So they think that they're seeing just like this beautiful girl, but instead they're going to look at her and they're going to turn to stone and they're unfortunately going to die. So now you're probably thinking, well, Perseus is after her head. How is he grabbing her head and decapitating her if you can't look at her? But he had actually already thought that through as well. He ends up using a shield that Athena had gifted to him, and he uses it to guide him. So he's looking in the shield's reflection, and he's not looking directly at Medusa, which is what's causing him not to turn to stone. It's not a direct eye contact, it's not a direct stare, nothing of the sorts. And his tactic ends up being successful. He ends up decapitating Medusa while she's asleep, and he thinks that's it. He successfully did what he was asked to, and he's on his way back to Seriphus. When he gets back, he actually realizes that he had been tricked by King Polydectes to do this, and that King Polydectes had just wanted his mother. So he takes Medusa's head out of the bag that he had, and he ends up turning King Polydectes and all of his supporters to stone and rescues his mother, which they eventually go back to where Acreus had banished them and cast them away from, which unfortunately he does end up like hitting Acreus with a bolt, and it does end up killing him, which solidified the whole your grandson's going to kill you thing that set them away in the beginning. But that's for another time. And yeah, so now that you know what led Perseus to kill Medusa, let's go into depth as to like certain aspects of this myth. So when I was originally reading the myth, I was thinking, what's a Gorgon? Why do they keep mentioning this? What type of role do they play? So Gorgons are three females who are monsters, and when you look at their face, you turn to stone. So obviously in this myth, that's going to be Medusa and her two sisters. They play obviously a big part because, well, it's Medusa. But when I was reading the story, I was like, okay, well, why is Medusa the only one being killed? And that's because she was the only mortal Gorgon out of the three, and her two sisters were immortal. Now, let's just dive a little bit into Medusa's background, give you some info on her. Her and her sisters were not always Gorgons. They became Gorgons when Poseidon had looked at Medusa, fell in love. She did not feel the same way about him whatsoever, so he decided to punish her because his love for her consumed him so much that he needed to punish her. So he turns them into Gorgons, which they are now. Medusa also has two offspring named Pegasus and Chrysaor, which are rumored to be both her and Poseidon's children, because obviously we learned about it in class. You do not need to have sex to conceive children. And these two children appear when she's decapitated and the blood drips from her head, it ends up producing her offspring. So here's a few images below me on the screen. This first one is showing Perseus approaching Medusa. The next image is Perseus actually beheading Medusa. And then the last one is showing Perseus fleeing with her head. I chose these images to share because it's interesting to see how Medusa is portrayed as this innocent maiden as she once was before she was a Gorgon, because that ends up actually not being the case at that moment. She is a dangerous monster, so, Perseus isn't thinking that he's doing anything wrong, which these pictures kind of give that vibe to people reading. It also portrays and graphs her beauty. Like, it shows what was drawing people's attention in and how she's so desirable, which would eventually claim all her victims. So yeah, there's other versions of the myth out there where Medusa is said to have the power of hypnosis, which that's not true. It had nothing to do with any sort of superpower. It was just really her beauty that drew people in, and yeah, it had nothing to do with anything else. This just goes to show how easily myths can be manipulated into meaning something different the longer something passes. So this myth is obviously not recent. So between the time it was made and now, there have been some different versions of it coming out. So yeah, that was my research that I did on this myth. It really answered my question and clarified a few things on why Medusa was killed, why was Perseus the one doing it out of all people, which because he was a young kid who was tricked, and that's just the unfortunate truth of it. So I hope this answered some of your questions on this myth, and I hope you guys have a great day.